Despite everything we know about her opponent, Donald Trump, despite everything Trump did in his first term, despite his efforts to overturn the last election, despite his 2 impeachments, despite his 4 indictments, his 86 criminal charges and 34 felony convictions, despite being found liable for sexual abuse, despite his racism and misogyny and xenophobia, despite his professed admiration for dictators and his pledge to be a dictator himself on day one, despite all of that, there is still a 50% chance that he could once again be president of the United States. Now, some of that is due to the durable and still growing fascist movement in this country, a movement of people who embrace Donald Trump not in spite of his cruelty, but because of it. And as we think about the future of this country, even beyond Election Day, we should not deny that that movement exists. Trump's coin toss chance at re-election is also due in part to a very weak Republican Party. There have been some notable exceptions, people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and John Kelly, Republicans who stood up to Trump at significant personal and professional cost. But there have been far more profiles in cowardice. People like Mitch McConnell and Nikki Haley and nearly every single elected Republican who isn't on the verge of retirement. They have all bent the knee to a man they know will turn on them as soon as it is convenient, and hey, maybe even before then. Trump's chance at winning is also due in part to the venal self-interest of America's billionaire class. Some of them have stifled dissent to curry favor with Trump. Others have abandoned their prior criticisms and backed Trump in the hopes that he might cut their taxes again. And then, of course, there's the world's richest man, Trump's very own wingman, who literally leapt to Trump's side in his quest for unchecked power. All of that has mattered. All of that is why Donald Trump might win again. But there is another very important factor in all of this, something that has kept Trump in range of the presidency once again, and that is civic disengagement. A pervasive disinterest and fatigue with American politics that Trump has further exploited by numbing the American populace to the things that would have once shocked them. People who have been failed by a fragmented information ecosystem that has made disinformation seem as fact-based as actual information and has left people misguided or confused and ultimately apathetic. I myself saw it firsthand a month ago when I traveled to a union hall in the swing county and swing city of Saginaw, Michigan, to talk to some of the voters who just might decide this election. Are you going to vote?
I'm not.
You're not. So, which, just to be clear, you are okay with either outcome?
I am.
Okay. And is anybody undecided? Okay.
I'm undecided because I haven't seen enough of it yet. I need to pay closer attention and kind of do more independent research before I make my judgment.
Have there been news stories about the candidates that have made its way to your information feed?
Not particularly. It's just how people kind of act around this time. Mm-hmm. It's a little crazy, so I try not to partake so much.
What does the deciding process look like for you?
Just sleeping on it and going with what my heart tells me is best for the country. Because, being an American, we have the right to vote, so it's a blessing. And so just take my time with it, yeah.
How do you think you're going to ultimately decide? I know we talked to one gentleman who said, I think I'm just going to kind of go with my heart on election day.
As the election comes a little closer, I think the more I see and the more truth that ends up coming out, I'll be able to make a more educated.
You think you need more time?
Yeah.
If the union doesn't endorse a candidate and you're left, to decide on your own, first of all, do you think you're definitely going to vote?
I'm definitely going to vote.
How do you think you're going to ultimately make that decision?
I think I'm still going to be conflicted in the voting line.
Really? Literally a game time call?
I think so.
Do you think you're going to vote in November?
I'm undecided at this point. I just need to do my own research and make that make that decision still. I don't really look into it too much.
Is there one issue that you really care about?
The economy. Like, if you can't afford to have a house or buy your family food, then nothing else really matters.
Do you think you're going to vote in November?
I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm waiting until something
pops out at me. I don't know what yet that could be, but...
Has any political kind of event or news crossed your radar recently where you thought,
Not really, I don't think. But I haven't, I try not to talk about it with my friends because they just get in heated arguments, so I just try and stay out of it.
So would you say you're basically an undecided voter?
Yeah, I'm pretty in the middle right now.
According to the latest polling, undecided voters are 4% of the voting population. And by all reasonable estimates, this looks like it's going to be the tightest race in modern political history, meaning those undecided voters are the ones who might very well choose the next president and take the country down one of two radically different paths. Joining us now is Melissa Murray, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, and Michelle Goldberg, an opinion columnist at the New York Times. Ladies, this is the last show before Election Day. And what I think, it's all stressful, right? But I think one of the factors that makes it extra stressful is the notion that these kind of potentially inconsequential factors like weather or traffic or rain or just kind of how someone feels getting up that day, those could be the votes that decide who is president in 2025. I wonder how you're thinking about the margin right now and the sort of risk factors, if you will, Michelle.
I think the margin, no matter how it comes out, says something so dark about this country. If 30% of the population, if 40% of the population was going to vote for Donald Trump, you could still sort of say, what has gone wrong in American society that this is attractive to people? And so, it's truly terrifying that, our kind of democratic birthright, so many of the liberal democratic assumptions that we grew up with, that we assumed we would be able to pass on to our children, are just like an absolute coin flip away from being protected or being lost.
Melissa, Franklin Foer, I feel like there's widespread understanding of the stakes of this election, right? And especially on the left, right? There's a real sense that this, as Michelle says, is a coin toss between, one form of government and something very different and much darker. But Franklin Foer has a new piece in The Atlantic, and he contends on the cusp of Trump's potential return to power, the resistance now feels like a relic of another era. The sense of outrage which carried Biden to victory is not what it once was. Does that comport with the experience you've had? Do you agree with that?
Not entirely. I will say that we're living in a world where there are two different political realities, two different socioeconomic realities, and they're pretty much in conflict. When Simone and I went all around the country this summer talking to black women, I would say that, almost to a person, many of them understood that this election was about democracy. Democracy was on the line. That didn't mean that all of them were ready to vote and that we were ready to vote for Kamala Harris, but they recognized that there was a serious existential threat to democracy. Not everyone believes it, obviously, but in the same way, not everyone believes that there's an economic crisis. Like, there are those who on the coast believe that this economy is rebounding. And in fact, all economic indicators indicate that that is, in fact, the case. But in the middle, there are those who feel something completely different, and their economic reality is not like what everyone else is experiencing on the coast. So we have this complete misalignment, and we're literally at the point where people are going to continue corroding democratic institutions to the point where they may actually fall apart because they believe so strongly that the price of milk is too high. And we cannot disabuse them of that in the same way we cannot disabuse individuals of the view that we are literally on the precipice of becoming something that is not a democracy.
I wonder if we should sort of parse the question about who feels this most, who feels the stakes most closely and most viscerally, because, I think back to the January 21st of 2017, I'm so bad with the years, the Women's March, right? Mm-hmm. The resistance was in large part, that was the kind of kickoff moment for the official resistance. It was led by women. And I do feel like when you talk about the stakes, there is a class of Americans, women, who really understand, because of the abortion decision and what has happened to women's health care, reproductive health care more broadly in this country, they really feel the difference between having a president who is Republican/conservative and one who is not.
Well, I think part of what made the resistance so powerful was a sense of shock. It was almost as if people had let down their guard and allowed this to happen. And then they could sort of mobilize and treat it as aberrant and undo it. And there was a sense that we could somehow return to an idea of America that had existed before the election in 2016. I think if Trump, particularly after January 6th, is restored to power, nobody's going to be able to say, like, this isn't who we are. It will quite clearly be who we are. At the same time, yes, although I think that especially initially, you're going to see a lot of despair and withdrawal and kind of people pulling back into what they've called in other countries an internal exile in the aftermath, because it is so degrading, it is so defiling. At the same time, Trump will give people a million reasons to mobilize. I wrote in my column today, if he is telling the truth about setting up a network of camps, of internment camps in this country to round people up by the millions and imprison them, there will eventually be
a mounted and fierce resistance.
There will be a mounted and fierce resistance. What truly terrifies me is that we know from the generals who've worked with Trump that is the moment in which he wants to sick the army on the American people. And this has been such a hard thing to convey to voters. They'll say, well, it didn't happen before. Why would it happen next time? And the people who stopped it from happening before are out there trying to warn us.